Dear Robert, first of all, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, both to our conference, your contributions to our Masters International Istanbul 2021 conference as a keynote speaker, and at the same time for accepting our invitation for this interview on Middle East, Islamic world, and Arab world.
My pleasure.
At the beginning, I want to introduce you shortly. You are Robert Bianchi, is a political scientist, an international lawyer, and an authority on Islamic world and China. Robert Bianchi got his doctorate and law degree at the University of Chicago, and after that, he also joined the faculties of the political science department and the law schools. Robert Bianchi has also held a professorship at the University of Pennsylvania, the American University in Cairo, Qatar University, the Johns Hopkins Nanjing Center, the National University of Singapore, and the Shanghai International Studies University. And he also contributions to many universities all over the world. Bianchi is a former Peace Corps volunteer and 3-time Fulbright grant and a recipient of the Albert Hourani Book Prize for his book, Guest of God, Pilgrimage and Politics in the Islamic World. His most recent book is China and the Islamic World, how the New Silk Road is transforming global politics. And he also several books, Unruly Corporatism, Associational Life in 20th Century Egypt, and Interest Groups and Political Development in Turkey, Islamic Globalization, Pilgrimage, Capitalism, Democracy, and Diplomacy. And he has many articles, essays, and other research in the field of Middle East, Islamic world, and also Arab world. Thank you again, Robert. I want to start with my first question. When we talk about Arab world, we are talking about the region of 22 countries from Morocco to Iraq. Is this region can be accepted as a unit or unique structure?
I think the Arab world is less unified and coherent today than it has been in the last several decades. But it's not unusual in that regard. I think that all of the standard conventional geographic regions that we are accustomed to are now changing and widening their connections with other regions and with all continents. So globalization has really redrawn the map politically, culturally, and the idea that any region is now exceptional or self-contained is hard to defend. The growth in connectivity and exchange and cultural mixing has eroded all idea that there are pure types or consistent unbroken traditions anywhere in the world. So we're thinking more in terms of hybrids and syntheses now than self-contained compartments. And the Arab world is, I think, much more connected with all other continents, Europe with the Far East, with Africa, North America, South America. And then also, I think a lot of the countries in the Arab world are increasingly divided internally, so that parts of them are probably more prosperous and educated and open, and therefore connected with the outside world. Whereas villages and mountainous areas just a few hundred kilometers away from the major cities are really in a quite different environment.
Thank you. Let me go on with my second question. What's your opinion about unified Islamist movement or unified Islamic culture or such kind of terms?
Well, Islam is more a civilization than it is a political entity or a cultural unity. Islam is very pluralistic and diverse. It has many different forms of expression, varying from country to country, from language to language, from urban areas to rural areas, and from generation to generation. So I think there is a common set of ideals and some institutions that overlap from country to country and place to place. But the most important thing about Islam is that it has a universalist perspective and universalist aspirations. And in that regard, it is quite similar to universalist traditions elsewhere, including the West, including China, including much of South Asia. So if we look at Islam as a civilization, rather than as a political movement or as an ethnic property of a particular group of people, then we have a much more interesting perspective, which opens it up to exchange and to cooperative relationships with all other traditions in the world. And that's compatible with what we were saying earlier about globalization. The emphasis on exchange and interaction is, I think, overtaking the notion that any tradition or civilization or religion is somehow self-sufficient or superior.
Thank you, Robert. Let me check my notes for my third question. According to United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, the data shows 160 million people across 10 Arab countries, or 41% of the total population were classified as poor, while another 25% were vulnerable to poverty. What do you think about these? Which factors play a role in this problem, the poverty problem?
Well, poverty is not exclusive to the Arab world or the Middle East. It is common in all developing countries, and it's common everywhere. We have a great deal of poverty in Chicago as well. So the United States is hardly immune from the same problems. Poverty in itself is tolerable if there is a sense of justice, of fairness in the society as a whole. In other words, if people feel that their burdens are somehow shared with other people in the same society, then I think they're more willing to tolerate inequality. And if they feel that the leadership and the ruling classes, the people who are enjoying the most privilege, if they feel those people are making a good faith effort to create greater opportunities for everybody, then they have a future to look forward to. And they can imagine that their children and family members will enjoy a better life than they are enjoying at the moment. So as long as that sense of optimism and fairness and burden sharing is present, then poverty is less of a danger politically and in terms of revolutionary violence than a lot of people think. The problem is that that sense of justice and goodwill and good faith on the part of the elites is lacking in most developing countries, and I think increasingly lacking in Western Europe and the United States as well. And one of the problems that we have in the United States is the sense that the people who are left behind today are going to be left behind forever, and that there really is no way forward for them. So this is what creates social cleavages and potential political disruptions that can spin out of control, and not only in one country, but in many countries at the same time.
Thank you, Robert. In my journeys to Europe, I met many young scholars, researchers, some master and PhD students from Arab world, especially from North African countries, Morocco, Tunisia, or Algeria. This means human capital. Do you think this society will create some difference for these nations in the future?
They're making a difference now. And it's a difference that is very powerful, potentially. But because these people are so talented, and because they're so independent, and because very often they're so impatient, they are subject to reprisal. And the very elites and governments that need their assistance the most are, in fact, the least trustful and the least willing to cooperate with them, the least willing to draw on what they have to offer. So the people you're describing have to be very flexible and very shrewd. And it helps if they have alternatives in terms of employment, in terms of travel, in terms of friendships and residences. The North Africans that you mentioned are a very good example of people who have traditionally developed a very good set of networks in France and in Western Europe and in North America and elsewhere, so that their facility in French and in Arabic and in English gives them a very wide arena in which to flourish, which is important because when things get uncomfortable in one country, it's very good to be able to move next door or across the Mediterranean or across the ocean. And I have many friends and colleagues who are in exactly that situation. They teach in their own countries. They advise politicians and governments in their own countries, but they always have their passports ready, and they always have connections that can help them find employment in another country, either for a short time or an extended period of time. And of course, many of the governments and universities in the Arab world and the Islamic world count on that, and they deliberately look for talented people who are unhappy where they are at the moment and who are looking for a move. So a lot of the universities throughout the Middle East and the Islamic world have benefited from exactly that kind of political uncertainty. So there's an excess of talent and an excess of suspicion of that talent in the very countries that need it the most.
Thank you, Robert. Now, please let me change the topic a bit. I want to talk on refugees, maybe refugee problems. What will you expect for the future when we think about the refugees or the problem of migration in terms of maybe social problems?
Immigration is a big problem, and it's becoming a greater problem all the time. The major difficulty is that the countries of Western Europe and North America, which are most capable of receiving immigrants, have moved away from their commitments under international law. And to say they've moved away from those commitments is a generous characterization. It would be more accurate to say that they're openly violating international law and they're breaking their promises to the international community. And they're making discriminatory judgments about who to allow entry and who to allow to apply for asylum on the basis of religion, of race, of nationality, of educational background. And they are in some cases forcing people to return to the very dangerous circumstances that they fled. All of this is a flagrant violation of international law and international treaties. And the effort to reverse that tendency and to hold these governments accountable is still weak, but it's gaining traction. And over time, there will have to be some political pressure within the United States and Canada and the countries of the European Union to reverse this tendency. There are economic factors that are connected to this, especially in terms of labor supply and in terms of aging populations. So that the irony is that a number of the countries that are rejecting migrants and asylum seekers actually have the greatest reason to accept them because they need talent, they need younger populations, they need to expand a labor force that is aging and that can't be replenished entirely from local population increases. So there is a combination of political and economic pressures that could combine over the next several years to make immigration fairer, more humane, and to encourage countries to devise more collective responses in terms of sharing the burden of immigration and devising standards and objective measures of what the burdens are. Unfortunately, very little is happening in that direction at the moment. We can only look forward to it in the future. But at the moment, the situation is very discouraging.
Thank you, Robert, for your opinions and evaluations about this great, important problem. Does Middle East have its own destiny or future of this geography strongly into the hands of the tigers of the Western and Eastern countries?
Yes, what a great question.
World maybe with tigers of the East and the West.
Right.
You understand what I mean?
The whole business of geopolitics being dominated by American and Chinese rivalries, and everybody else now somehow having to choose sides.
You also underline these countries: China, USA, Russia, Iran.
Well, there are potentially other players besides the United States and China, but they don't seem to be capturing the imagination of the rest of the world, or I should say, engendering the suspicion of the rest of the world as much as the US and China are. My impression is that most people in developing countries, including the Arab world, the Middle East, the Islamic world, Africa, Latin America, are quite mistrustful of both the United States and China. They don't want to be dragged into the conflicts of larger powers who don't care about them and whom they feel are selfishly creating greater dangers and possibilities of warfare. And they're more interested than ever, more determined than ever, to shape their own futures and to avoid being a satellite or a subordinate, a client of any particular great power. And I think that both Middle Eastern and Islamic societies are prime examples of that. But there are many countries in Asia and Latin America and Africa who have very similar sympathies. So the notion of non-alignment, the notion of resisting tight alliances, formal treaty arrangements and military blocs is very much in vogue now. Countries like Turkey and Nigeria and Indonesia and Brazil and Iran and Pakistan and on simply are not willing to jump in one direction or another in order to satisfy the demands of an American or a Chinese elite that has its own selfish agenda in terms of expanding spheres of influence or great games of seeking hegemony. I think that there's a great suspicion of any kind of hegemon and unwillingness to encourage or collaborate with any effort that looks like it is a kind of effort to achieve unilateral dominance or a unipolar system. So, and I think that's healthy. I think that there is a sense that international relations are much more fluid and that there are opportunities for middle-sized countries to benefit from playing a number of different bargaining chips at the same time. And Turkey, of course, is a prime example, but it has lots of countries.
Yeah. My other question also linked to previous question. Besides of this situation, in the near future, do you see more stable Middle East or debates, conflicts will be more deeper?
Well, the Middle East has never been stable. And when people think that a part of it is stable, they're fooling themselves, because the stability that people value is very often artificial and simply a result of repression or of coercion, not a result of consent. And so it's not genuine, it's not lasting. and it's not accepted or created by the people themselves. So the increasing voice and influence and impatience of the people in all Middle Eastern countries and in virtually all of the developing countries means that there will be increasing debate, increasing struggles for power. And this is a good thing in my estimation, because silence is deceptive. Silence is not a sign of stability. It's a sign that trouble is brewing out of sight, and that soon we will have to deal with it. So sharper debates, more public debates, more public organization and participation is probably a good thing. In fact, it's probably unavoidable. And if we hope to enact reforms that can create a world that is more just and where there are more opportunities of peaceful cooperation, then this is exactly what we need.
Thank you, Robert. In my last question, this is not question, maybe we can get your opinion about Afghanistan. I read your essay article, the title with Economic Future of Afghanistan, China-US rivalries after the Afghan War. When we think about on the economic side, you remarked, you underlined some opportunities about Afghanistan, about, you talk about natural resources and a new Silk Road, and some advantages about the location between Indian Ocean and Central Asia. May I have your opinion about the economic opportunities for the future of Afghanistan?
Oh, they're enormous. Afghanistan is potentially a great asset, not only to its own people, but to its neighbors and to countries very distant from Afghanistan, across the continents and across the oceans. I think the perception of Afghanistan as a valued asset economically and geographically is exactly one of the reasons that there has been so much warfare and so much military intervention in Afghanistan, because there was a feeling that if any great power had too much influence in Afghanistan, it would damage everybody else. So the stress in international politics has been, in a sense, to lock Afghanistan up and make sure that nobody was able to benefit from it too much, either from its location geopolitically or from its natural wealth in terms of minerals, or in terms of its ability to develop into an energy corridor that would support the supply chains and the manufacturing industries of rival countries. So, for example, we have had two pipelines on the drawing board for at least 2 or 3 decades. One pipeline going from the Caspian Sea and Turkmenistan to India, and another pipeline going from Iran to China, to Western China, and then to the Pacific coast. Both of these pipelines have been frozen by decades of war. So China and the United States, India and Russia, in a sense, have put Afghanistan's wealth and geopolitical value in the deep freezer so that nobody would benefit from it. Now, if the war is in fact at an end and Afghanistan has an ability to tap its own resources and enter into agreements that are independent and fair with many different foreign partners, we can look forward to a situation where Afghanistan benefits multiple parties, even if they're rivals to one another, rather than Afghanistan being the victim of the mutual jealousies and conflicting ambitions of its own neighbors. And if you look at it that way, Afghanistan is really just a kind of metaphor for much of the rest of the world. And that the idea of the new Silk Road or the One Belt, One Road, the idea of global connectivity, connecting hemispheres, continents, this is something that is potentially beneficial to everyone, and that really supersedes national interest or political ambition. So if Afghanistan can be viewed in this way, then certainly the idea of a trans-African railroad can be seen that way. The idea of another canal connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans through Nicaragua can be viewed that way. The idea of a Pan-American railway can be seen that way. We're already seeing the idea of Eurasia becoming more and more meaningful, more and more of a reality, so that the idea that the Atlantic ports and the Pacific ports can be connected regularly by overland transportation as well as maritime transportation around Africa, even into an Arctic passage with global warming freeing up the northern oceans. All of this really is a different world. It's far beyond our conventional notions of globalization, which tends to be connected narrowly to the interests of multinational corporations. Now we have a globalization that is universal and that literally includes every nation and potentially every class in the world. So the end of the war in Afghanistan creates a lot of possibilities. And it would be a shame if the rulers in Washington and Beijing missed that opportunity and instead simply moved their focus of rivalry and brinksmanship and military confrontation from one place to another, from land battlefields to maritime battlefields. And unfortunately, this is, I think, where the American foreign policy is headed. It's headed toward increasing efforts at containment of China in the Western Pacific, in the South China Sea, and increasing connections with Taiwan in a manner that is potentially provocative to Beijing. So the reality is that the possibilities of miscalculation and military confrontation are growing, and they may grow faster than the possibilities of this more universal and beneficial globalization that I'm describing. in connection with the end of the war in Afghanistan. So these are the two possible futures that we are facing and that our leaders are choosing, and we can't let them choose for us. We have to make sure that they choose in our interests and not in their in the interests of their misguided notions of great power politics or nationalist domination.
They really had hard times, and actually nowadays also current situation. At the end, I am sending my best wishes to Afghan society, Afghan people, and also to all Middle East. I hope they can benefit or they achieve these opportunities you underlined. And I hope they can reach the bright future. Thank you very much, Robert, for your time and for your deep, wide, and important evaluations and opinions about both Middle East and Islamic world conflict.
Let me ask you, please, to give me your views about how Turkey fits in to all of these questions. How do you see Turkey's position in the world today and in the future?
We are maybe some economic and I want to give you political answer. Some economic and political constraints limits the ability to or policy actions of the country. I can say only that now, but I'm hopeful about the future. Turkey is a strong country, both in terms of human capital and economic and natural resources, and also has the advantage of geographical location. These are positive for Turkey, and in the both near future and also in the future, I see sunny days for Turkey and Turkish people.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for your contributions. It was very nice for me to talk with you on these topics. And in the future, I hope to become together again for having your opinions in new topics or these topics also. Thank you very much.
Certainly, I look forward to talking again. Bye-bye.